you so much for spending time with us and listening to Angela Jackson's presentation, the online program manager from USD's Center for Teaching and Learning. Our next presenter is going to be James Preston. James has just recently completed his thesis for the HSAD specialization for his MBA program. And I was the chair for his thesis committee, and so I can't even begin to tell you how much work went into this particular project for James, but he was very excited about it, and we felt that it was a significant contribution to the literature. So of course there are so many additional things that he would like to do with the data that he got access to for his thesis project. So today he's going to share a brief presentation with you all. So again, this is James Preston, and he is a recent MBA graduate from USD's Beacom School of Business with a specialization in health services admin.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Jewel. Carrying on from that thesis conversation, I would just say that a big part of the education process at the USD Business School is not necessarily in the classroom, but that working together in teams aspect that I gathered from it. I just had to say that that was one of my biggest takeaways, and probably most important thing I learned was how to work together in teams, and particularly doing this remotely. It's kind of neat. You know, you wouldn't, 10 years ago, I don't think this would be happening. So as the technology continues to grow and we continue to just make progress across the board, it'll be fascinating to see what 5 years from now has to demonstrate. But I wasn't really planning on talking too much about the thesis aspect, but I really wanted to sort of just kind of mention my real world applications as utilization, the application of data, so to speak. Just real quick to bring you up to speed, I guess I was the business service coordinator for regional health, which is one of the big three in South Dakota as far as not private nonprofits. You know, you got Sanford and Bear out east, and out west here we have regional health. So everything that I described and I've done, it's not spilling the beans on regional health. All it is just really kind of giving an idea of what I'm pretty certain every single major healthcare organization has to deal with. So in that caveat, I shall begin, and I want to share with you just a few slides to kind of gather my thoughts here. If I speak too fast or I'm unclear, please stop me and ask a question. But moving on, as the business services coordinator, I was pulled into a role that sat between finance and revenue cycle, and the big data branch in any of these healthcare organizations is called decision support. And you'll find that these people are like your brilliant coder type minds that are just fantastic about developing applications through all sorts of different software programs to arrive and retrieve data. And then you use that data for just pretty much whatever you want to answer. And so the big part that I did was, you can see on these bulletins, patient satisfaction surveys. Now that's getting to be such a huge part of how we do business, because doctors are reimbursed on a certain level based upon how well they perform in the patient's minds. And so there's one real question in that survey. They asked patients 10 questions, and there's one question on there that's really sort of the crux of this whole thing. And it's like, how was your experience with your doctor? Was he or she appropriate, yada, yada? They answer between 0 and 10. If it's an 8 or higher, they get binged in a positive way. So I will go back, and I have a slide that's more directed towards that. But the other big aspect, and there's no beating around the bush on this, is referral data, because it's called steerage and leakage. And you want to, business-wise, without breaking the law, you know, make sure you know where your money's going and where your patients are going. That was really huge on the minds of executives, because the last thing you want is to lose revenue and potential charges and future earnings to your competitor. Contract management. So what I did is I walked in federal and local and state contracts with the government and also with mainly private businesses. So in the occupational health world, that's a whole beast in its own right, but it requires a whole lot of negotiations, and technology has now made it far more easier than ever to do that. When I began my administrative roles in life, the previous career before I was acquired by Regional Health, we were on paper. So I've actually witnessed the paper charts, and then we went to the electronic charts, and I went back to the paper charts, and then we sold the business, and I became acquired. And so, anyway, insurance groupings, and that's a huge part of making sure that people are billed correctly and adequately into the correct insurance. If anyone's been to the doctor, nothing's worse than not getting your EOB or having an error, and it happens all the time. Patient visits, this is just typical quantitative data that you want to monitor over a period of time, and then financials and auditing, and that was just, and there's just so much more, but I just will leave it at that as far as the big points that I was part of. So patient satisfaction, there's a company called HealthStream. They're based out of Tennessee, and what they do is they will call the patients randomly after their visit, and then they rank them on the survey. And so this patient is asked to, 1 to 10, how was your visit? Was it courteous? Did you get the time you wanted? Everything from the front desk check-in to the exit. And I mentioned this is important because there's value-based purchasing, pay for performance, these quality measures. Some of you guys, if you go into the work world, will talk about meaningful use. That's a big part of, it was signed into law by President Obama, but President W. Bush kind of started getting things going with it. And meaningful use was part of the High-Tech Act. That sort of just financially incentivized clinics in 2008, 2009, through 2012 to start implementing these investments in electronic health records, primarily, that stands for also electronic medical records. So big investments, and that economy has just blossomed. It's huge. So then how much the physician can reimburse, as I mentioned previously, really obviously important to the physician, and really important also to the system, because you want the patients to be happy, and then you also need Medicare to be happy. So funny point about this is there's a time frame from when you exit the doctor's office to when you receive these calls, and if you can imagine, you want to get this phone call to describe your experience before you get your bill, right? Because if everything is going to change the moment you see how much you have to pay for it. But this company, very aware of this, tries to be very punctual in their calls to the patients, because the sooner you get them, the higher the scores are going to be. You get out between that 15 to 30-day window when they get their bill, the scores drop. So it's interesting. But I'm going to move on to a major electronic health record company called Athena Health. A little factoid about Athena. The founding CEO was the nephew of George W. Bush, and this company is located out in Boston. I'm not saying there's any connection there, but it was just kind of interesting. Athena Health is a major player. They do primarily outpatient, but they also try to work in inpatient facilities as well. They're an electronic health record platform, so I know maybe some of you have seen this, have used it. Over the years, they continue to grow. So my regional health has actually switched to Epic, which is what Stanford uses. And so I have a lot of learning to do when it comes to understanding Epic, because my understanding is it's kind of a little tricky, but it's a fantastic electronic health record platform as well. And so, yes, I say the unspoken yet largely real reason for tracking referrals includes, but it's certainly not limited to the downstream revenue that leaves the system. And so you have steerage versus leakage. You want to steer, your downstream revenue back towards the health system. and for good cause too, because obviously it's kind of a dog-eat-dog world out there, and the cost involved with providing care is just astronomical. So depending on who you talk to, that is always somewhat to become of that downstream revenue aspect is nothing people really like to talk up in front, but when you talk to people on the side, it's always about revenue and referrals. So then the pattern of referrals, so we would look at physicians that contracted with us that had financial stakes in other facilities. So this is huge too because there's violations of Stark Law, and some of you may be aware of that. The last thing you want to do is have enable a physician to continue to refer patients to his own clinic, which is illegal. It's a huge violation of Stark Law, which falls under another statute, but essentially all it means is just don't refer to yourself. The interesting caveat to that one is that ambulatory surgical centers are exempt from this law. So anyway, it's kind of a toothless law in some regard. However, it's something to be aware of. But anyway, and then the other one, it's like, well, are we losing valuable procedures to the competitor? And what procedures exactly are they? Because the more complicated the procedures are, the more costly it is for the healthcare provider. If it's a super easy arthroscopic MCL or arthroscopic cartilage repair, those are typically done in 30 minutes by a really well-trained physician, and they bill them out, and you can start pumping them through like a factory would, and increase the amount of output and increase your revenue. The really complicated cases are the ones that will dog down the system. And so not only do you need to understand what you're referring, but you need to understand where it's going to, what type of procedure it is. So that's another thing that this data would present. And then this last point is I made a big stink in 2014 about this, and because I noticed a particular facility through Athena Health, you can run so many different reports, and I kind of got really good at it, and so which is natural if that's all you do is work in it. But you can filter by the types of prescriptions, and I was seeing that there was a particular facility that was just shooting off fentanyl prescriptions just left and right. And anyway, it was enough. It was alarming enough that their prescription amount was like 90% higher than the average. And so, nonetheless, that was addressed, and I hope now things have improved. But I mean, you can do everything in this Athena Health and electronic health record stuff that it's almost creepy. Like you can understand what the physician is actually doing, what they're prescribing, how much to who, when, what insurance is. I mean, it's really fascinating. But I'm going to move on from the referral aspect to the other big part of any business is contract management. And I use this company called MetaTrack. So I would go in there and upload completed signed contracts by the CEO. And then obviously you check a box. Are they evergreen? Evergreen just means that their contract goes on in perpetuity and there's no need to adjust it until one of the parties comes forward. But most contracts are obviously they're 1 to 2 years contracts for service, and you have to agree to a particular fee schedule because these contracts were related to occupational health. And as you can imagine, not all urinalyses are charged the same, but they're all pretty roughly close based upon the major fee schedule, which is a word that I had to learn at get-go. But the fee schedule simply is what Medicare, the major one, is what Medicare will charge for every type of procedure you're ever going to need. And it's based upon a whole lot of different charges. So without getting into that too much, contracts are really, really, really an important part of doing business. And so maintaining those and being diligent is huge. And so we had MetaTrack. It would do everything for us, essentially, as far as calculating the times that renewal. And another aspect of the back-end part of business is this insurance groupings aspect that I discussed earlier. And that meaning, if you have a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Iowa, and sometimes the front desk folks when they're logging you into or registering you, administering at the front desk, they may make a mistake, and that happens quite regularly. And so with this type of health record electronically, you can go in and just verify that everything is done appropriately, and that greatly reduces the administrative costs, as you can say. The system isn't perfect, but the administrative cost of having to go back and correct insurance billings is an absolute nightmare, and for the patient and the administrators included. So that's a really hugely important part. And I had to mention real quick, these health ministries type of insurance products that were coming about. So after the ACA was signed, there are these products that come out that are qualified as insurance, so you couldn't get a penalty. Although now there's no such thing as a penalty starting, I think, now. But it was a way to work around it. And they're really interesting products because they come about from all these different parts of the world, and they don't operate with cash on hand. They operate with, or they're not like insurance where they're backed up by a ton of money. Members are essentially making monthly contribution to these products. So that was kind of a headache to try to figure those out. But moving on, and I'm almost kind of wrapping this guy up here. But this right here is this is a snapshot. If you want to look at the power of data, and where my heart really lies is in the care for people, because that's the whole point of healthcare. Is like, if we're in a developed society, we need to keep each other healthy. And how do you know if you're healthy or not? Well, you got to study it. You got to look at the data. And so I was part of a big group. We had a new president and CEO that was part of regional health in 2015, and he went on an initiative to really understand the problems that are affecting our Native American populations. And so, in collaboration with a few other of my colleagues, we sat there for about 2 months and we just poured over data. And we looked at the calendar years of 2013 and calendar years 14 for issues that are affecting the Native American populations. And this chart is a little difficult to see because I copied and pasted it as a file as opposed to a picture. But what it shows you is the growth in the diagnosis changes for, I believe these are inpatient charges. And as you can see at the very bottom, sadly, there's a growth in suicide ideation in that year, those years between calendar years 13 and 14, almost 75 to 80%. And at the bottom, you can see that there is a decrease in percentage charges all the way in feeding problems in newborn children. So this chart, really what it shows you is the variances between the years of people being admitted to the, I guess, you know what, this has got to be the ED, emergency room that we had. So I took this little chart with me because I have a lot of this data that I worked on, and it's really quite beautiful because when you see the problems, you know where to put the resources, and that's huge. It's huge. I mean, when you continue forward, and then this one here, this is going to be the same thing. These are primary diagnoses changes between 13 and 14, 2013, 2014, in outpatient clinics. This is looking at our outpatient facilities that we managed in Pine Ridge, and we looked at what were the main causes of people showing up to the doctor that day. And the tobacco use disorder and the acute, I guess it was, but just looking at tobacco use disorder at the very bottom, it was a hugely problematic issue for the outpatient facilities out there. And so therefore, what do? You got to try to figure out and work with the behavior. And so you get the resources directed in that area. I'm trying to pull up my chart here. But yeah, acute urinalysis NOS. So Yeah, it's been a few years, but that is an example of looking at population health and really kind of understanding where people are hurting and how we can do it to better their lives. So I love that aspect of it. And then also pulling data out. The biggest part of running a business is understanding your cash flow, your charges, and everything of that nature. And so this is just an example of that study that we used, and really focusing on our Native American and Indian Alaskan populations, and splitting up the charges by demographics, essentially by race, and we looked at the total volumes, the sum of the charges, emergency department visits, and percent by race of charges. And so this was a real interesting demographic study because our Native American populations are typically some of the most frequented to emergency rooms for regional health and by demographics, which is normal. We're not the most diverse state, but per direction of our president and CEO, he was very fascinated in what we can do to really help this population. And I just can't even stress how important it is to continue to be open about these issues and these problems, so that we can fix and prescribe policies and resources that will help mitigate unnecessary visits to ER and other problems, and really benefit the quality of life. And so that's in sum the power of data. It really just helps explain the world that we don't understand. We're still trying to understand it, and it's changing rapidly. It's like the question is not what is available, but what are you trying to find? Because if I just, similar to our thesis question, we just looked at competition in healthcare, which is a large part of why costs are driven, and in the United States we want to fix that. So we can pull the data and we can try to answer these questions. And as statisticians may say, data, it can be manipulated and used for whatever you want to use it. But namely, you just need to get it. And that's really hard in healthcare too. I found when I was doing my research that a lot of this data is proprietary. And so there's some walls up there in the world that if you don't have deep pockets, it's hard to fill it. And now we're moving to the East Coast, and I just have to tell you that if you guys get a computer science degree in conjunction with your business degree, I think it's like the new medical or new law degree, quite honestly. There's just so many jobs available in this world, particularly if you're interested in data security. So nonetheless, that kind of concludes my presentation. I just wanted to discuss briefly the power of data, what I used to do, and just thank you for having me. I think University of South Dakota is a fantastic institution, and I'm really just honored to have gotten through it in 2 years, so thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your time, James. We really appreciate you taking